The smell of pine reached me before I even opened my eyes. For a moment, lying there in the gray pre-dawn of December 23rd, I thought I was back in the house on Calloway Street where I grew up, the one my father kept, a live tree in every Christmas until the needles covered the carpet, and my mother complained every year, and every year quietly loved it. Then I heard voices downstairs, my son's voice and my daughter-in-law's, and the pleasant illusion dissolved. I lay still and listened, not out of habit or nostalgia, but because something in the tone was different from the usual morning rhythm of my own house. There was a sharpness to it, a clipped efficiency that reminded me of the sound a job site makes right before a safety inspector shows up. Everyone moving too fast, voices too controlled. I checked the clock on my nightstand. 6:42. My son did not get up at 6:42 unless there was a reason. I'm Walter Greer. I spent 31 years as a structural civil engineer for the city of Phoenix. I designed load-bearing systems, drainage infrastructure, retaining walls. My whole career was about understanding what holds things up and recognizing when the foundation has quietly shifted beneath the surface. I was good at it. Good enough that I retired at 61 with a pension, a house I owned outright, and the quiet certainty that I understood how things were built and how they fell. I should have applied that skill to my own family 2 years earlier. My son Marcus had moved in with his wife Diane in March of the previous year. They'd been living in Scottsdale, renting a place neither of them could actually afford on the combination of his inconsistent freelance marketing work and her part-time teaching schedule. When their lease ended and the new rent came in $400 higher, Marcus called me. "Just until we get back on our feet, Dad. 6 months, maybe 8. We'd figure it out together." I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. My wife Carol had passed 4 years before that, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the morning. I held her hand in hospice and felt the particular silence that fills a room when someone leaves it for good. After she was gone, the house on Mesquite Ridge Drive felt enormous. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen she'd renovated herself, a backyard with a fountain she'd chosen from a catalog and made me install over a long Saturday in October. I told myself having Marcus and Diane there would be good. Company. Family. I descended the stairs that morning carrying my work boots because the wood on the 3rd step from the bottom creaked and I didn't know yet whether I wanted them to know I was awake. Old engineer habit. When you're assessing a structure, you observe before you disturb. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Diane standing at the counter with her phone, scrolling. Marcus was near the window with a coffee mug, not drinking it, just holding it. He was wearing a button-down shirt. On a Sunday morning, 2 days before Christmas, he was wearing a button-down shirt. I stepped into the doorway. "Morning." Diane looked up without quite smiling. "Oh, Walter, you're up early." Marcus turned. "Hey, Dad, coffee's fresh." I poured myself a cup and stood at the kitchen island. The counter had been wiped down recently. There was a faint smell of all-purpose cleaner underneath the pine. In 22 months of living with me, Marcus had wiped down a counter maybe 4 times. I counted the coffee mugs in the drying rack. 3. They'd had company already this morning, or they'd each had 2 cups and rinsed everything. "We had people coming tonight for dinner," they reminded me. Diane's parents, her brother Greg and his wife, 2 of Marcus's college friends. 12 people total. I'd offered the house because I'd been offering the house for every gathering since Carol died, because it was a good house for gatherings and because I had stopped knowing how to not be useful. I went back upstairs, showered, and started reading on my tablet. From below, I could hear them arranging things. Diane directing in a voice that carried the same clipped efficiency as the morning conversation. By noon, I could smell the roast she'd put in, the green bean casserole, the sweet potatoes. The house smelled like every good Christmas memory I had, and I sat at my desk and let myself almost believe the evening would be fine. At 3 in the afternoon, I came downstairs to set the extra leaves in the dining table, something I'd done every Christmas since we bought the table 30 years ago. Diane was in the kitchen. I pulled the storage bench from the hall closet and walked toward the dining room. "Actually, Walter," Diane called out, "don't worry about that. We've already figured out the table situation." I stopped. The dining room had been rearranged. The main table was set for 8, with Carol's good china that I kept in the hutch and that I had never given Diane permission to use. A smaller folding card table had been placed near the kitchen entrance, set with everyday plates and mismatched glasses. "Where am I sitting?" I asked. Diane appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Oh, we thought you'd be more comfortable at the small table. It's quieter over there, you know. Less crowded." She said it the way you'd explain something to someone who couldn't quite follow. I didn't respond. I went back upstairs. At 6, the guests arrived. I came down in my good wool sweater, the dark green one Carol had bought me the last Christmas. She was well enough to shop for gifts. The living room filled with conversation and the particular warmth of people who didn't spend enough time together. Diane's mother, Patricia, hugged me and said I looked wonderful. Her father, Frank, shook my hand and said it every year. I sat at the card table. Nobody said anything about it directly, though Greg's wife caught my eye once, and I could see her discomfort. I pretended not to notice and talked to Diane's father about the Cardinals and the weather and the road construction on I-17. Midway through dinner, Marcus stood and raised his glass for a toast. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked Diane for the food. He thanked himself for the wine selection. He was in the middle of a sentence about the year ahead when Greg's wife asked, "This beautiful house, Marcus, have you always lived here?" Marcus smiled. "Oh no, this is my dad's place." He paused just long enough for the pause to have weight. We're doing him a favor, honestly. Big house for one person. He gets lonely, right, Dad? He looked at me across the room with the smile that had never once in 36 years reached his eyes when it was directed at me. Diane laughed softly. "He needs the company. We're basically his caretakers at this point. Can't really manage on his own." She said it lightly, as if it were fond, as if it were the kind of gentle family teasing that makes people feel warm. The table went slightly quiet. Frank looked down at his plate. Patricia's smile stiffened. Marcus kept going, voice easy and expansive the way it got when he'd had 2 glasses of wine and an audience. "I mean, when you think about it, we're doing everything here. Dad just kind of exists, right, Dad?" He laughed. "The deadweight of the household." He said it like it was a joke, like I was in on it. I said nothing. I sat at the card table with Carol's china on the table behind me that I had not been invited to sit at, with my son's laugh hanging in the air of the house I had paid for and maintained for 24 years, and I said nothing. I set down my fork. I folded my napkin. I stood, smiled briefly at no one in particular, and walked upstairs. I heard Diane say something to the table. Heard Marcus pivot smoothly into another topic. Heard the dinner continue as though nothing had shifted. I sat at my desk and did not cry, did not rage. Something inside me went very still, the way a beam goes, still under an impossible load, right before it either holds or gives. I am a structural engineer. I know the difference. What happened next didn't feel like anger. It felt like clarity. By 11 o'clock, the guests had left, and I could hear Marcus and Diane cleaning up downstairs, the muffled rhythm of dishes and low conversation. I opened my laptop and started where I always start when a structure needs assessment: documentation. I'd kept records the way I'd kept them my whole career, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Utility bills, grocery receipts when I paid, the informal agreement I'd written up on a notepad when they moved in Marcus's handwriting next to mine. His acknowledgement that this was temporary, that he'd contribute to household expenses once the freelancing steadied out. I had it in a folder. I'd never needed it. I pulled it out now, then opened my spreadsheet and began to build the case the way I'd built load calculations. Column by column, month by month. I had paid the mortgage in full before they moved in, so there was no rent to calculate, but there were 22 months of utilities. Groceries, the property tax payment in April that Marcus had promised to split and didn't, the water heater I'd replaced in June when it went out, and they were on vacation in Sedona, the new refrigerator in September. I worked slowly and carefully, the way I worked when the numbers mattered. At 1:17 in the morning I had a total, $44,812. 22 months of carrying 2 able-bodied adults who had turned my dining room table into a statement about my worth in my own house. I closed the spreadsheet, labeled it Household Support Summary 2023 to 2024, and leaned back. Then I opened my filing cabinet and started looking at the rest. I want to be clear about what happened next. I was not looking for anything specific. I was doing what I had always done at the end of a project, reviewing the full file before closing it out. And that is when I found something I had not been looking for at all. In October, I had received what I assumed was a duplicate statement from my home equity line of credit. I used the HELOC occasionally for house projects, the deck I'd refinished 2 summers ago, the HVAC upgrade. I'd glanced at the statement, assumed it was a billing cycle duplicate, and put it aside. It wasn't a duplicate. Someone had made 4 withdrawals from my HELOC between July and October. The total was $23,400. I had made none of them. I set the statement on the desk and sat very still for a long moment. Then I pulled up my online account and looked at the full history. The withdrawals were there in the transaction log. The IP addresses logged for the access my bank showed them as a security feature I'd enrolled in years ago were not my computer, not my phone. One of them I traced through the network router log I kept as part of my home network setup. It resolved to a device registered on my home Wi-Fi under the name Marcus iPhone. I'm a structural engineer. I build things that are meant to hold weight safely over time. When I find a hidden crack in a foundation, I don't patch over it and hope for the best. I document it. I assess the full extent of the damage, and I make a decision about whether the structure can be saved or needs to come down. I sat at my desk until 4 in the morning. When I finally closed the laptop and turned off the lamp, I had a second spreadsheet, a folder of printed documents, and the first clear sense of direction I'd felt in 2 years. I wasn't angry. I had moved past anger somewhere around the 3rd withdrawal entry. I was done. At 7:15, I called my bank. The representative's voice was cheerful and professional, the voice of someone who fielded difficult calls all day and handled them with practiced calm. I explained that I needed to freeze my HELOC immediately and report potential unauthorized access. She walked me through the fraud reporting process, took my account information, and told me a case number would be generated within the hour. She asked if I knew who might have accessed the account. I have a suspicion, I said. I'll need to speak to your fraud department. Of course, Mr. Greer. I'm transferring you now. The fraud specialist was thorough. He asked careful questions, and I gave careful answers. I told him about the device access logs. I told him about the withdrawals. I told him I had not authorized any of them. He told me the bank would initiate an investigation, freeze the HELOC immediately, and that depending on their findings, I might want to consider involving law enforcement. I thanked him, wrote down his name and direct extension, and hung up. Then I picked up my phone again and called a number I had looked up the night before. Alan Marsh. Marsh and Delgado Attorneys at Law, Phoenix. His firm handled elder financial abuse, estate disputes, and civil litigation. His assistant picked up on the second ring. I understand it's early, I said. I need to schedule a consultation as soon as possible. Today, if he has anything available. There was a pause, the sound of a calendar being checked. He has a 9:30 cancellation. Can you make 9:30? I can. I left the house at 9 without telling Marcus and Diane where I was going. They were still asleep. I pulled my car out of the garage slowly and drove west on Camelback Road with the sun behind me and the Estrella Mountains pale and distant ahead, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel that morning, something close to relief. Alan Marsh was in his mid-50s, compact and precise, with the particular quality of stillness that good attorneys develop the ability to listen without reacting. His office was on the 12th floor of a building downtown with a view of the city grid stretching out toward South Mountain. I sat across from him and laid out the documents I'd brought in a brown accordion folder that had held engineering project files for 30 years. I showed him the household support spreadsheet, the HELOC withdrawal records, the device access logs, the informal written agreement from when Marcus moved in, the original deed to the house. I spoke the way I'd always presented project findings chronologically, without editorializing, letting the numbers carry the weight. Marsh listened without interrupting. He made notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. The HELOC access, he said. You're certain you didn't authorize it? Completely certain. I hadn't touched that account since April, and that transaction I remember clearly. It was 1100 for the deck staining I did myself. Have you confronted them? No. I wanted legal guidance before I said anything. Good. He nodded, made another note. Here's where you stand. The house is yours, deed in your name, no co-ownership. That makes the eviction straightforward. No written lease, no rental payments under Arizona law. That makes them licensees, not tenants. You can terminate a license to occupy with as little as 30 days written notice. And the HELOC? That's a different matter. Accessing a financial account without authorization is fraud. If the bank's investigation confirms what your logs suggest, that's potentially criminal. That's a separate track from the civil matter. You can pursue both simultaneously. He leaned back. The household support figure 44,000, that's documented? Every dollar. Utilities, groceries, property tax, appliances. I have receipts for most of it. Bank statements for all of it. Civil recovery is possible, but slower. Let's focus on the two immediate priorities, getting them out of your house legally and cleanly, and preserving evidence for the fraud investigation. He paused. Mr. Greer, how are you doing with all of this? The question caught me slightly off guard. I thought about it honestly. I'm clearer than I've been in 2 years, I said. He nodded, as if that was the right answer. Let me draft a notice to vacate, 30 days from service. I'll also write a formal demand letter regarding the HELOC withdrawals. That gives them the opportunity to provide an explanation or return the funds before this escalates to criminal referral. Both letters go out certified mail today. I'll also have a process server attempt hand delivery. I wrote him a check for the retainer, $1,500, less than Marcus had taken from my HELOC in a single transaction in August. The drive back to Mesquite Ridge Drive took 19 minutes. I parked in the driveway, sat in the car for a moment, then went inside. Marcus was at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, scrolling his phone. Diane was upstairs. I poured a glass of water and stood at the counter. He looked up. Hey, Dad, where were you? Errands, I said. He nodded and went back to his phone. That was the entire conversation. What I want to tell you about those next 3 days is the texture of them. Because this is the part nobody tells you about when they talk about setting boundaries or standing up for yourself. They talk about the moment of confrontation. They don't talk about the days in between. When you carry the knowledge of what's coming, and the other people in your house are carrying on as normal, making coffee, watching television, complaining about the traffic on the 51, those days have a particular quality. They feel very long and very short at the same time. On Christmas Eve, Diane made hot cocoa and put on a movie in the living room and called up the stairs, Walter, come watch with us. I came down and sat in the armchair that had been my chair since 1998 and watched the first 40 minutes of a film I'd seen before. And the whole time I thought about the accordion folder in my filing cabinet upstairs and the 2 certified letters traveling through the postal system toward this address. On Christmas morning, Marcus gave me a bottle of scotch. I thanked him. Diane gave me a book about hiking trails in Arizona, which struck me as either thoughtful or accidental. I genuinely couldn't tell. I gave them the gift cards I'd bought, Visa cards, $50 each. Not generous, not pointed, just present. At dinner that evening, just the 3 of us, I sat at the main table. Nobody brought up the card table from 2 nights before. Nobody mentioned what Marcus had said about Deadweight. We ate turkey sandwiches from Christmas Eve leftovers and talked about nothing in particular, and I watched both of them very carefully and thought, they have no idea. The certified letters arrived on December 27th. I know because Marsh's office sent me the tracking confirmations. The process server attempted hand delivery the same afternoon. Marcus answered the door. I was in my bedroom and heard the brief exchange. The door opening, a pause, the door closing. Then footsteps, fast ones. Walter, Marcus's voice from outside my bedroom door. His voice had a quality I'd heard in it maybe 3 times in my life. Once when he was 8 and had broken a neighbor's window. Once when he'd gotten a DUI at 22. And now, Walter, open the door. It's open, I said. He came in holding the envelope, already torn, the letter in his other hand. He was breathing through his nose. His face had the tight, controlled look of someone who was very angry and hadn't decided yet what to do with it. "What is this?" he said. "It says what it is at the top. Notice to vacate, 30 days from service. You hired a lawyer." His voice was flat. "I did. Against your own son. The lawyer is handling a legal matter. The relationship is a separate conversation." He slapped the letter against his thigh. "This is insane. You can't. This is my home, too. I've lived here. I've taken care of you." I looked at him. I kept my voice completely level. "You have lived here for 22 months without paying rent, utilities, or groceries. In that time, you have referred to me as Deadweight in front of 12 people. And there is a second letter in that envelope, about a matter the bank is currently investigating." He stared at me. The second letter, I could see from where I sat, was still sealed inside the torn outer envelope. "What second letter?" he said. "The one from my attorney regarding the HELOC withdrawals, $23,400, between July and October." The color in his face changed, not flushed. It went the other direction. He stopped. "There's documentation," I said. "Bank access logs with device identifiers. I'm an engineer, Marcus. I've kept meticulous records for 31 years. I don't leave foundations unexamined." He left the room without speaking. I heard him downstairs almost immediately, his voice low and fast, Diane's voice rising in response. I didn't try to make out the words. I opened my laptop and added a line to my incident log. December 27, 4:47 p.m. Notice to vacate and HELOC demand letter received and opened. Both parties now informed. What followed was a pattern I recognized from 20 years of contract disputes and site conflicts. First comes denial, then negotiation, then desperation, and finally, if the other party is rational acceptance. The only variable is how long each phase takes and what damage gets done during the negotiation and desperation phases. The calls started the next morning. Marcus's aunt in Flagstaff, a woman named Beverly who I'd always liked and who opened with, "Walter, I'm sure this is all just a terrible misunderstanding." I told her what I told everyone who called that week, briefly and without anger. What had happened, what the bank had documented, and what I was doing about it. Most people went quiet and then said something non-committal. Beverly said, "Well, I had no idea it had gotten to that point." And then we talked about the weather in Flagstaff, and she hung up shortly after. Diane's mother, Patricia, called on the 29th. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when someone is very worried but trying not to show it. "Walter," she said, "I want you to know that I respect whatever decision you've made. But she's scared. She's not sleeping. Can you tell me, is there any room to talk?" "I appreciate you calling, Patricia," I said. "But this is between Marcus and me at this point, and the answer is no. The notice stands." She was quiet for a moment. "What they said at dinner the other night, the Deadweight comment." She paused. "I want you to know that I'm ashamed of that. My daughter knows better. I'm sorry, Walter." That meant more than she knew. I thanked her, and we hung up. On the 30th, I came downstairs to make coffee and found Marcus at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting. He looked up. He looked like he hadn't slept. "I need to talk to you," he said. "All right." I sat down across from him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shirt was the same one he'd been wearing the day before. He pushed the legal pad across the table. "I've been trying to figure out how to explain this." He swallowed. "The HELOC. We needed the money. The freelancing wasn't covering what I said it was covering. We were behind on everything before we moved here. I didn't know how to tell you that. So when I found the login information in your files, you went through my files. I wasn't planning to steal it. I kept telling myself I was going to tell you, that I was going to pay it back once things turned around. $23,000, Marcus. I know." He put both hands flat on the table. "I know what I did." I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 36 years old, and he looked about 12, and part of me registered that and felt something that might have been grief, and another part of me noted the grief and set it aside because grief was not information, and what was on the table was information. "The bank has opened a fraud investigation," I said. "That is a process I cannot stop now, even if I wanted to. My attorney has sent you a demand letter for repayment. Those are the tracks this is on now. I can't change that. Are you pressing charges? He asked. His voice was very quiet. That will depend on how the bank's investigation concludes and what my attorney advises. At this point, the only thing I can tell you is that the notice to vacate stands and you have until January 26th. He nodded slowly. He was still looking at his hands. Something else. I kept my voice steady. I want you to think about what it means that you took that money without asking. Not because I'm going to lecture you, but because you are my son, and I spent 36 years trying to give you a foundation strong enough to stand on. You did not stand on it. That is not my failure to account for, and it is not something I can fix for you. You're going to have to do that yourself. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, I'm sorry, Dad. The way he said it, not the performance I'd been hearing all week from his voicemails, not the calculated version, the way he said it that morning was something different. Small and clear and probably true. I stood up. I accepted that in the sense of hearing it. I poured my coffee. I went back upstairs. They didn't wait until January 26th. On January 8th, I heard the specific sounds of departure boxes moving, tape guns, furniture scraping. I stayed in my room most of the day. By 3 in the afternoon, a moving truck was in the driveway, one of those small rental ones. I watched from my bedroom window as they carried out what they'd brought with them and the things Marcus had accumulated since moving in. The gaming system I'd never said anything about, the second television, the standing desk he'd installed in the spare room. Diane made 4 trips with bags of clothes. Marcus carried the heavier boxes. At 5 o'clock, I heard the front door open. Footsteps on the stairs. A knock. Come in, I said. Diane opened the door. She stood just inside the threshold, not coming further into the room. She'd been crying, her eyes were red-rimmed, and she wasn't trying to hide it. I just want to say she stopped. I want to say, I know what I said at that dinner was wrong. The caretaker comment. I know it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong when I said it, and I said it anyway. She pressed her lips together. I don't have an excuse for that. I looked at her. I hope you, she paused. I hope things are good here. For you. She turned and went back down the stairs. I sat at my desk for a moment. Then I went to the window. At 5:20, the truck pulled out of the driveway. Marcus's car followed it, then Diane's. I watched until both vehicles turned the corner at the bottom of Mesquite Ridge Drive and disappeared into the ordinary afternoon traffic of Phoenix in January. The house was quiet. Not the tense quiet it had been for the past 3 weeks. Not the muffled voices through the wall quiet of 22 months of shared space. This was the quiet of a structure that had been holding a load it wasn't designed for, and had finally been relieved of it. I walked through the room slowly, the way I walked a job site at the end of a long project, checking the work, assessing what remained. Living room, mine. Books, my chair. The photograph of Carol and me at the Grand Canyon in 2009 that had been moved to a shelf and then slightly too far from the light. Kitchen, mine. Cabinet handles, clean counters. Diane's parents' china, Carol's china, in the hutch where it belonged. Every piece present. The spare room. Their mattress was gone. The standing desk was gone. The room was just a room. The afternoon light coming through the blinds in that particular January slant. Dust motes hanging in it. I stood in the doorway and thought about what the room had been before they moved in. I'd used it as a drawing room, drafting table, file cabinets, the good lamp Carol had found at an estate sale. All moved to the basement when we made it a guest room. Could be moved back. I went through the rest of the house quietly, and then I went back downstairs and out the back door into the yard. The fountain Carol had picked out was running. I'd made sure to keep it running all winter because the stone cracked if the water froze in the basin. I sat on the patio chair I'd had since the deck renovation and listened to it. The bank's fraud investigation concluded in the second week of January. The evidence was what it was. The investigator called to inform me that the findings supported my account, that the unauthorized access had originated from a device registered to my home network, and that the matter had been referred to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes Unit. A detective contacted me 3 days later. I answered every question. I provided every document. I told the detective that the person who had accessed the account was my son, and that I understood what that meant, and that I was not changing my statement. He asked, the way they always ask, if I was sure. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. The civil track moved separately. Marsh filed the civil suit for recovery of the HELOC funds in late January. Marcus had retained his own attorney, a public defender type, from the look of the filings, not someone with a lot of civil litigation experience. His attorney sent a letter offering a payment plan, $500 a month for 47 months. I authorized Marsh to respond that I would accept a lump sum settlement of $18,000 within 60 days, or proceed to judgment. He came up with $14,000. I don't know how, whether his mother helped him, whether he'd sold the gaming equipment, whether he'd gone to a credit union. I accepted it. It was less than the total, but more than I expected, and there was a calculation in me. The same calculation I'd made my whole career, about when a partial recovery was more efficient than a full fight. We settled. The criminal matter was out of my hands, and would go wherever it went. My neighbor Gus came over in late January with a six-pack and sat on my patio. Gus had been my neighbor for 11 years. A retired firefighter with a garden that embarrassed mine and opinions about everything that I mostly agreed with. I heard the moving truck, he said. I told him the condensed version. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Gus. When I finished, he cracked his beer open and handed me one. That dinner, he said. The card table. He shook his head. I have 4 kids. If any one of them did that to me in my own house, I would have. I know. You handled it better than I would have. I didn't handle it well for 2 years, I said. That part matters. He thought about that. Fair enough, he said. We sat for a while in the January evening, the fountain running, the city noise softened by the walls of the yard. The stars were beginning to come out, the specific Phoenix stars that competed with the city light, but won on clear winter nights. You know what I realized, I said. I'd been managing my son's feelings about being a grown man for so long that I forgot I didn't have to. I kept making it easier for him to not become who he needed to be. Thought I was being a good father. Turns out I was just making it comfortable to stay a boy. Gus was quiet for a moment. You couldn't have known it would end up the way it did. I could have known sooner than I did. I looked at the fountain. Carol always said I was too patient. Thought she meant it as a compliment. I think she might have been telling me something. We finished our beers, and Gus went home, and I sat alone until the yard was fully dark and the stars were out completely. I wasn't thinking about Marcus, or the bank, or the settlement. I was thinking about the spare room upstairs, and the drafting table in the basement, and the lamp Carol had found at the estate sale. I was thinking about how I'd been so busy managing what my house had become that I'd stopped thinking about what I wanted it to be. The next morning, I went down to the basement and started moving the drafting table. It took most of the day. 2 trips up the narrow basement stairs with the table in pieces, reassembling it in the spare room, finding the lamp and plugging it in to check the bulb, pulling the file cabinets up one at a time. By evening, the room looked like what it had been before. A space where a person who liked to build things could think. There was a half-finished set of drawings I'd started 2 years ago for a small footbridge design I'd been working on for fun, just for the pleasure of it. I found them in a flat file folder and laid them on the drafting table and stood there looking at them for a long time. I called my daughter-in-law's mother, Patricia, the following week. Not because I needed to, but because she'd called me and the call had mattered, and I wanted to return that. She picked up on the second ring. "Walter," she said, and the relief in her voice was immediate and genuine. "I just wanted to follow up," I said. "Things have settled here. I'm doing well." "I'm glad," she paused. "I want you to know what happened at that Christmas dinner. I've spoken to Diane about it. I want you to know she knows it was wrong." "She told me," I said. I appreciated that. "I hope," Patricia's voice was careful, "I hope you won't close the door entirely. On family. I know you have every reason to, but..." She trailed off. "I'm not closing any doors out of spite," I said. "I'm closing them because the people on the other side have to earn the right to open them again. That's a different thing." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I think that's right." We talked for another 20 minutes about her garden and the new route the city was building past her neighborhood and her younger grandchildren who were learning to read. It was a good conversation, the kind that reminded me what ordinary connection felt like. I've been thinking, in the months since, about what I was actually protecting when I finally moved. Not the money, though the money was real, and the money mattered. Not even the house, though the house is mine and it means something. What I was protecting was the specific quality of this life I'd built. The life I'd built with Carol and maintained after she was gone, the routine and the quiet and the sense of a space that reflected who I actually was. When Marcus and Diane were here, I had been gradually, incrementally edited out of that space, moved to the card table, referred to as deadweight, reduced. I hadn't let it happen all at once. That's the thing about a structural compromise, it rarely announces itself. It starts as a hairline crack that you don't notice because you're not looking for it. And by the time it's visible, it has already traveled further into the foundation than you can see from the surface. The job isn't just to fix it when you find it. The job is to understand how far it went before you found it, and to make sure the same failure mode doesn't repeat. I'm 63 years old. I have a pension and a house I own outright and a room upstairs with a drafting table and good light. I have a neighbor who brings over beer and talks honestly, and a neighbor on the other side who saw what happened at Christmas dinner and called it what it was without me asking. I have a fountain in my backyard that I am keeping running all winter because the stone cracks if the water freezes. I am not lonely. I was lonely when the house was full of people who made me feel erased in it. There's a difference. And it took me longer than it should have to understand that a house full of the wrong people is a lonelier place than an empty room with a good lamp and work you love waiting on the table. I finished the footbridge drawings last week. 22 feet, pedestrian load rating, designed for a hypothetical park setting that doesn't exist yet but might. I've been thinking about submitting them to the city's Volunteer Infrastructure Consultation Board, something I'd been meaning to do for 2 years before I somehow ran out of time for it. I have time now. I have all the time in the world. If you've stayed with this story, I hope something in it was useful. If you're carrying something similar, I want to say clearly, the patience you've given is real, and it matters that you gave it. But patience is not the same as permission. The two got confused in my house for a long time, and it cost more than money. Know what your house is worth, not the market value, the other kind. And if you found value in this, please like and share it. It means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.